On a frigid winter night in 1962, Boston's streets were eerily silent, the usual hum of city life replaced by an unsettling stillness. Inside a modest apartment, 55-year-old Anna Sleezers, a widow quietly piecing her life back together, prepared for an ordinary evening. But behind her door, something sinister lurked. By morning, the city awoke to chilling news. Anna had been found lifeless, the circumstances surrounding her death deeply unsettling. Fear tightened its grip on Boston. Neighbors, paralyzed with dread, whispered in disbelief. How could such horror strike so close to home? Yet, Anna's death was only the beginning. An unseen predator had emerged from the shadows, and the terror that followed would haunt Boston for years to come. The headlines painted a grim picture, but beneath the surface lay unanswered questions. Who was behind this wave of fear, and what dark truths remained hidden? A city paralyzed by fear, a predator lurking in the shadows. This is Derrick Investigates, and I'm Derrick. Tonight we open the case file on a chilling chapter in American true crime, the Boston Strangler. Between 1962 and 1964, Boston's quiet streets became a predator's playground. One by one, victims fell prey to an unseen menace, leaving a city gripped by terror, meticulous, elusive. His crimes left behind no clues, only questions. After the tragic killing of Anna Sleezers, Boston was left gripped by terror, the shadow of violence lurking just beneath the surface. The investigation was underway, but with no answers in sight, fear and uncertainty began to seep deeper into the city streets. It seemed as though the killer's reach was growing ever wider, and the residents of Boston had no idea how far this nightmare would go. I've stood outside enough crime scenes to recognize the weight of uncertainty that lingers in the air. In cases like this, one thing is always certain. Whoever was responsible had either done this before or would do it again. The real question was, how soon? Just 2 weeks later, on June 28, 1962, tragedy struck again. Mary Mullen, an 85-year-old widow whose quiet life revolved around cherished visits from her grandchildren, was found under eerily similar circumstances. Her apartment no longer a sanctuary, but the scene of a chilling crime. Mary, a widow whose fondness for sharing stories brought moments of warmth to those around her, was discovered in her Commonwealth Avenue apartment, her final moments shrouded in terror. Her death initially seemed natural due to her age, but unsettling details soon surfaced, raising suspicions. The nightmare escalated on June 30, 1962, when 2 women were found dead on the same day, miles apart. Nina Nichols, a 68-year-old retired physiotherapist, was a beloved member of her community who often volunteered her time to help others. She was discovered in her Commonwealth Avenue apartment, her life cruelly cut short. Meanwhile, in Lynn, Massachusetts, 65-year-old Helen Elizabeth Blake, a nurse who had devoted her life to caring for others, was found under similar circumstances. The stark contrast between their quiet lives and their brutal ends sent shockwaves through the region. I've seen my fair share of crime scenes, but the eerie precision of these attacks was something else entirely. No forced entry, no obvious struggle, just a quiet, methodical horror. It told us something critical. This was someone who could blend in, someone these women didn't see as a threat, and that made him even more dangerous. Over the next few months, fear gripped Boston as the pattern began to emerge. Older women, living alone, were being targeted in their own homes. The killer left little behind except a growing list of victims. In December 1962, the pattern took a chilling turn. Sophie Clark, a 20-year-old college student full of dreams and ambition, was found dead in her apartment on Huntington Avenue. Unlike the earlier victims, Sophie was young and vibrant, known for her kindness and love of music. Her tragic fate shattered any notion that age or lifestyle could offer protection. Boston's women, young and old, began locking their doors in fear. As the months passed and the death toll rose, the city's sense of dread deepened, each new tragedy a grim reminder of the predator lurking among them. By the end of 1962, the death toll had risen to alarming levels. The killer's method was disturbingly consistent, gaining the victim's trust or forcing entry, strangling them with articles of clothing, and leaving their lifeless bodies in unnervingly staged positions. The use of stockings, scarves, or other personal belongings to strangle the victims added a grotesque intimacy to the crimes. Patterns like these are never random. The moment we started connecting the dots, it was clear this was deliberate. And that meant one chilling truth. Whoever was behind it felt in control, confident enough to strike again. Despite the terror, Boston's women tried to carry on with their lives, hoping that the nightmare would end. But the string of deaths continued. On March 6, 1963, Mary Ann Brown, a 69-year-old widow, was found lifeless in her Lawrence home. A quiet woman who enjoyed gardening and baking, Mary's death brought the total to double digits. Then, on May 6, 1963, 23-year-old Beverly Sammons was killed in Cambridge. A talented singer who dreamed of a career in music therapy, Beverly was known for her compassion and dedication to helping others. Her tragic death, coupled with the killer's evolving methods, left investigators baffled and the city paralyzed with fear. I've learned one thing after years of chasing shadows: patterns don't lie. And in this case, the pattern was shifting. Whoever we were dealing with, he was adapting, and that meant the city's nightmare was far from over. Since June 1962, with each new victim, a horrifying pattern began to take shape, painting a chilling portrait of a calculated killer. Each victim found in similarly disturbing circumstances. The women, all living in and around Boston, were discovered in their homes, strangled in what appeared to be deliberate, almost ritualistic positions. Each victim's life was abruptly cut short, their bodies left in a haunting arrangement, often sexually assaulted, then abandoned as though discarded. These women, who ranged in age from their 20s to their 60s, shared more than just a tragic fate. They had all been alone, living in apartments and homes that were once considered safe havens. Now, those very spaces became crime scenes, places of terror where an invisible predator stalked his prey. The methodical nature of the killings sent a shiver down the spine of anyone who heard about the deaths. The killer seemed to strike without warning, leaving no obvious trace behind. The bodies were found in varying stages of undress, their faces often frozen in a disturbing expression, as if they had known what was about to happen to them. The strangulation was the killer's signature, and it was as if he had perfected the art of his crime, always striking with the same efficiency and brutality. Despite the seemingly random nature of the victims, there was an unmistakable connection between them. All of them were women, all of them were found alone, and all of them shared a common vulnerability. In a city that had always prided itself on its tight-knit neighborhoods, the thought that one of their own was being hunted left everyone on edge. The killer moved through the streets like a ghost, slipping through the cracks of the city's social fabric, leaving a growing sense of dread in his wake. The fear was compounded by the killer's ability to remain undetected. He knew how to blend in, moving through the city without drawing attention. The police were at a loss. With each new victim, the community's terror grew. They were left to wonder, who was this predator, and how long would it be before they became his next victim? Would the killer strike again? The sense of impending doom was overwhelming, as the crimes seemed to follow an eerie yet unpredictable rhythm. With each new discovery, the haunting realization dawned. These crimes weren't random, and they weren't a series of isolated events. They were part of something larger, a chilling puzzle that no one could yet understand. The crimes persisted into late 1963, with Marie Evelina Corbin, a 57-year-old Salem resident, found dead on September 8th, and Joanne Graff, a 23-year-old who had recently moved to Lawrence, tragically killed on November 23rd. Both women shared the same fate as the others, and the killer's ability to strike undetected left the city feeling hopeless. Finally, on January 4th, 1964, the body of Mary Sullivan, a 19-year-old secretary, was discovered in her Boston apartment. Mary, whose radiant smile and bubbly personality had endeared her to everyone she met, became the last known victim of the Boston Strangler. In total, 19 women lost their lives under tragic circumstances. Each case was as unsettling as the last, leaving behind grieving families and a city desperate for answers. Examining each crime scene, one chilling fact became clear. This wasn't just about taking lives. It was calculated, almost ritualistic. The way the victims were positioned, the absence of forced entry, the unsettling precision, it all spoke of someone who wasn't just ending lives but asserting dominance. And an attacker who believes he's in control is the kind that doesn't stop. By now, it was clear that this was no ordinary criminal. A pattern had emerged, one that painted a chilling portrait of a predator who thrived on fear and cruelty. As the investigation into the brutal crimes continued, the chilling realization began to set in. These incidents were not isolated incidents, but part of a terrifying pattern. The discovery of Mary Sullivan's body in January 1964 only intensified the fear that the Boston Strangler was still out there, and the city had no idea who or where he was. From June 1962 to January 1964, a series of women had been found strangled, their bodies left in their homes or apartments. The manner of the killings, the positioning of the bodies, and the consistent sexual assault of the victims all pointed to a singular killer. It became clear that the investigation was about to take a major turn. As investigators began to piece the disturbing pattern together, the police were led to a man named Albert DeSalvo. DeSalvo, who had been arrested in connection to unrelated crimes, had been in and out of police custody for minor offenses. However, when he was questioned about the crimes, his strange behavior and vague, disjointed responses raised suspicion. In his confessions, he provided seemingly accurate details about the crime scenes, but there were also odd inconsistencies in his story that made investigators wary. His accounts felt rehearsed, too detailed in places, suggesting that he may have learned about the crimes from media reports or leaks from law enforcement rather than first-hand knowledge. As the investigation intensified, the police struggled to connect DeSalvo directly to any of the crime scenes. Despite his chilling confessions, there was no physical evidence tying him to the crimes. His lack of a clear motive, coupled with the unsettling inconsistencies in his behavior, led detectives to question whether DeSalvo was the true Boston Strangler, or if he had been caught up in a web of lies. Could he have been seeking attention, or was he the victim of an elaborate manipulation? The investigation took a critical turn as detectives focused on new forensic techniques. Initially, there seemed to be little physical evidence to connect DeSalvo to the crimes, but as forensic technology advanced, new leads began to emerge. Blood samples, hair fibers, and other forensic evidence were re-examined, revealing inconsistencies in the earlier findings. Despite the compelling nature of his confessions, the evidence was not enough to conclusively link DeSalvo to the crimes. With the case remaining unsolved, public fear began to shift. Residents of Boston grew more cautious, but with each passing day, the killer seemed to recede further into the shadows. The police turned their attention to any remaining clues, new witnesses, new forensic analysis, or perhaps even overlooked evidence that could finally crack the case. As the years went on, the investigation stalled. Theories abounded, ranging from DeSalvo's potential guilt to the possibility that the true killer was still hiding in plain sight, continuing to evade capture. The case remained one of the most haunting and perplexing mysteries in Boston's history, with no resolution in sight. After years of ambiguity and conflicting theories, a significant development in the case came in the 1990s, when new DNA testing methods were applied to the evidence from the Boston Strangler case. The revelation would either confirm Albert DeSalvo's confession or prove that the true killer had remained at large all along. In 1999, DNA analysis of the evidence from the 13 known victims of the Strangler finally came under scrutiny. Forensic experts revisited the samples, blood, hair fibers, and semen stains that had been carefully collected at the time of the crimes. Over the decades, it had always seemed impossible to definitively identify the Strangler's DNA. But advancements in forensic science provided hope. The breakthrough came when investigators re-examined the forensic samples from the victims, and compared them with DeSalvo's DNA. I had seen false confessions before, some given out of fear, others for attention, but this one always felt off. Now, with DNA proving DeSalvo wasn't at the scene, it was clear either he wasn't the strangler or he wasn't acting alone. As expected, the results confirmed it. DeSalvo's DNA did not match the DNA found at any of the crime scenes. The realization that his genetic material did not align with that of the strangler led investigators and experts to reconsider the validity of his confession. It was at this moment that the case turned a critical corner. For the first time in decades, there was a tangible piece of evidence that pointed away from DeSalvo. His confession, long seen as a potential explanation, was now clouded by the undeniable science of DNA testing. As the case re-examined these findings, local law enforcement worked in collaboration with state agencies and forensic experts to uncover the truth. They pored over old files, conducting new interviews, and reconsidering everything they thought they knew about the strangler. The evidence from the victims, especially the lack of connection to DeSalvo's DNA, seemed to hint at a darker, more elusive figure who had never been apprehended. Federal authorities, including the FBI, were also called in to provide additional resources and expertise. But even with the new forensic evidence, the investigation proved to be a challenging puzzle. The lead detectives had spent years on the case, and now they found themselves chasing shadows, faced with the unnerving possibility that the real Boston Strangler had never been caught. For the families of the victims, the new findings sparked a mixture of emotions: grief, anger, and disbelief. Many of them had lived for decades with the belief that DeSalvo was the man who had destroyed their lives. Now that certainty was shaken to its core. What had happened to the justice they had hoped for? Could it be that the killer who had haunted their city for so long was still unknown? As time passed, the case of the Boston Strangler remained open but unresolved. The DNA evidence had cleared Albert DeSalvo's name, but it had not led to the identification of the real killer. Was the Strangler still out there, living among the residents of Boston, or had they disappeared for good, leaving only the haunting memory of their crimes behind? The investigation continued, but answers remained elusive and the mystery of the Boston Strangler endured. What do you think happened to the real killer? Was the Strangler a single person or part of something much larger, hidden in the shadows? Thank you for watching and being part of our community here at Derrick Investigates. The case of the Boston Strangler forces us to confront an unsettling truth. Sometimes the things we trust most, our safety, our communities, can be taken from us in the blink of an eye. It's a chilling reminder of how vulnerable we are to the darkness that lurks just out of sight. At Derrick Investigates, we don't just tell stories, we search for answers. Every case we explore brings us closer to understanding the truth behind the headlines, no matter how deep the mystery runs. But even after all these years, one question lingers. Can the full truth of the Boston Strangler ever be uncovered? What do you think really happened? If you found this investigation compelling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the cases that continue to haunt us. Until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, and keep questioning everything. I'm Derrick, and I'll be back soon with another investigation.